This is Mattison Mathews with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program at the University of Florida. Today is November 8th at 9:51 a.m. and we're at the Florida Archaeological and Network Classroom in Pensacola, Florida to interview Mike Dawson for the Pensacola Environmental Oral History Project, and I'm joined by my colleagues from the Oral History Program and the Gulf Scholars Program. Mike, would you please introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. First and foremost, I'm very honored and happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Michael Dawson. I'm a native Pensacolian, native Sanders Beach resident. I'm also currently the president of the neighborhood association, the Sanders Beach Neighborhood Association. I'm unofficially and officially the historian for Sanders Beach.
Thank you.
And I'm 54 years old.
All right. And how long have you lived in Pensacola, and what originally brought your family here?
Well, I'm a native of Pensacola, so I was born here. I did leave for 3.5 years to work at University of Florida. I came back 1999. My family has been here and in Sanders Beach for about 115 years. I live in the family house, which is about the same age. So we're a cross between the Fell family and the Gonzalez family.
Okay. And could you tell me a little bit more about the family roots? Like, what was your family doing for work? How did they come to Pensacola? If you know anything about that.
Well, as much as I can, the family, like most people that lived in Sanders Beach, were the backbone of Pensacola. They were the masons, the plumbers, the electricians, everything. They were affectionately called the Bio Chico rats because you went to Sanders Beach, you built Pensacola, came back home and fished for food and all that kind of stuff. So my family predominantly, moons ago, they were the plumbers. They actually eventually had their own plumbing company, but the family did everything. They were shipbuilders, but predominantly that. As far as why they came to Pensacola, since the male side of the family was Gonzalez, it was probably just a migrational type thing. It's a port city. That would be my guess.
Thank you. And what was it like growing up in Sanders Beach? And could you describe the neighborhood growing up, maybe compared to now?
Sanders Beach, when I was a kid, we had the Sanders Beach Community Center, which was also known as the Den. Everybody in Pensacola knew about it, so there's a lot of activities for kids. Sanders Beach had a lot more kids than it does now. We're almost devoid of it, specifically because of hurricanes that have driven people away or destroyed houses. It was a lot of fun. All of Pensacola knew that Sanders Beach was a hub of activity, and it had been for a good 80 or 90 years, almost in that same building. It was a lot of fun. Pensacola was a different creature back then too. Comparatively speaking, now Sanders Beach has built up, mostly in a good way. There's not as many kids, and it's just because that Pensacola is now spread out more. We're getting more as far as newer families that are bringing in children or having kids, or we still have the seniors, a lot of the old dogs there. So just like anything else on the planet, it's evolved back and forth. Right now, though, it's just, it's Sanders Beach, and it's going to be around forever.
That sounds like a great community you guys have built up there. Do you have a favorite childhood memory or anything you strongly...
I had a lot of friends. I had a lot of friends that lived in Sanders Beach when I was a kid. I had a lot of my friends that lived everywhere else, Milton, Pace, Beulah. They all came to Sanders Beach. We'd go to the Den and play Foursquare. It was a lot of fun. You were by the water. Back then, you didn't think about being that close to the water. You didn't think about the privilege of being that close to that much resource. And then, of course, you had the amenities in the building that like hot dogs, nachos, all that kind of. It's the whole. Anybody that had a good childhood, it was the same there, but it was a bit different. We had Barberries, which was a small convenience store there in Sanders Beach. You had everything you wanted there as a kid. including hurricanes. That's okay.
Right. Thank you. So for Sanders Beach, your family's been there for 150 years. Could you maybe talk about what it was like before, like the factories and treatment plants came out? And that's okay.
No, go ahead.
Okay. And
that look on my face is like, because the creosote plant was there, since 1902. So we've always had that, but keep going.
Right. Okay. Let me rephrase my question then. When you first learned about the toxicity and contamination at the site, what was that community's response like? Because it sounds like, this was your guys' area. You guys were like connected to nature. You like to go out, and that's kind of how your community was centered and involved around it.
Even before I was born, and my great grandparents and grandparents, the creosote plant was it existed, and it was part of the Industrial Revolution. And that's the way you thought about it. You knew it smelled bad. You knew it probably wasn't the best thing to go dipping your toes into, but it had no actual effect on any of the day-to-day in Sanders Beach. It had no effect on what we did, So back then, having that in the community was part of the Industrial Revolution. It's kind of like we have Bell Steel in Sanders Beach, which is also, it's American-made steel, which is very cool. So it didn't really make any difference on the day-to-day life, even before I was born.
Okay. Well, kind of jumping around here, what role do you currently play in the Sanders Beach community?
For Sanders Beach, I'm actually currently the president of the Sanders Beach Neighborhood Association. Like I said, I'm also a unofficial official historian, so I'm trying to get, as they hate when I say this, the old dogs, the older senior folks that are having to move away or passing away, I'm trying to get as many of the pictures out of their houses that they've taken over the course of their existence. So because I've been there, I am one of the old dogs. I'm trying to keep everything now in check now that we know certain things. But as far as like official stuff, I'm the president, and hopefully we'll stay that way until everything calms down, with the creosote.
So right now, acting as president, what does it look like with the support from the community and like the general knowledge for the Superfund sites?
Because we've changed quite a bit in just the last couple of decades because of hurricane displacement, stuff like that. When we get new people in, it's a shocker. We've had a lot of folks who have bought houses and didn't know that they were on contaminated soil, so it takes us, the old dogs, or the board, the neighborhood board, some time to acclimate them. And the overall consensus is, of course, now that we know everything that we know, it's got to go. It's got to get fixed, and that includes the neighborhood cleanup. But I've actually seen people come in and then buy a house, and then a few years later, they're out. They just cannot. So it's everything from disbelief to let's get it fixed, to explain to me what's going on, to optimism that they know it's going to get done.
So what kind of is the specific role then of the Sanders Beach Association playing in advocating for the community with all these new people coming in and having to get the word out?
The ones that come to the meetings, we all play the historians and then the players of the future. And then we invite them to become players of the future with us if they're invested in Sanders Beach. We do as much as we can to educate everybody. We've asked certain things of the city to try and help us out as far as pinpointing properties that are contaminated so that somebody has the choice of buying into that property or not. That's been kind of a struggle. But that's what the board and then the old dogs in the neighborhood do. We're historians, educators, and then part of the solution, and bring everybody else in as part of the solution.
Thank you. That helps me get like a better understanding of where we're at right now. But I actually want to jump back for a second and talk kind of about your personal experience before you picked up this role. How, hold on, let me gather my thoughts. When did you personally first learn that this contamination and toxicity at the site was going to affect you on a personal level, kind of growing up?
This is going to sound weird, but when I was young, the house I live in now, I lived in for the first 9 years of my life, and my grandmother was there. And there was always, from the grandmother and everybody else, certain things to do and not to do when it came to the creosote plant. And this is back when it was still functioning, but it was winding down with the bankruptcy. So I would say early in my life, the earliest memory would probably be about, I would say 7 or so. You knew that if you walked from the house to, let's say, the Den, the old Sanders Beach Community Center, that you did not walk over much of any dirt. Like the yacht club has a lot of property that you used to be able to just cross Cypress over to K Street. And especially if it was after a rain, you knew not to go, because you would be walking in creosote water because it was contaminated. And so you knew it was not a good thing to come back with creosote on you or walk through it. So I would say a long time ago. Of course, back then you didn't know the dioxins and all that stuff. It was just not good. You know, it was not good, and it was not easy to come off unless you were doused with gasoline and scrubbed down. So I would say about 7.
Right. Could you describe the physicality of being there with the site, maybe the smell, taste, what you're visually seeing?
Pretty much never tasted creosote. I will say that I was smart enough not to do that. But some of the other things that would occur that weren't exclusive to the inside of the site was there was a train, the train that would go from Mahogany Mill across Cypress Street that would bring things to the site. So you always heard the train. You would hear the train dumping into the ponds and all that stuff. The smell of creosote was very predominant back when there was the vats of it. So you got very used to the smell of creosote, especially as you got closer to south of it. And you can still smell it to this day, not as predominant. Of course, sometimes, you know, if you smell something enough, you can kind of taste it. But it was a natural, you just knew it was the creosote plant. You knew what that smell was. You knew it was not gasoline. It was creosote. And but there was a lot of sounds. It was an industrial area, so it sounded like an industrial area that was going almost 24/7. But you just got used to it.
And as originally, it kind of sounds like it was this thing you knew growing up. You know, you don't walk over the dirt on the way to the beach. But how did the knowledge of the toxicity change from something just, oh, we don't do this, to maybe more scientific data-based? And how did that change how your neighbors interacted with the environment?
Most everyone in the neighborhood, the old dogs, didn't really know the severity of it until basically the bankruptcy. And originally it was Army Corps of Engineers that came in to start the cleanup, and then the EPA came in. And of course, then it took a while for them to start doing the analysis of what was going on. So, you know, I would think for me, about 39 years ago, because it really started about 41 years ago, but until they started doing analysis of like, whoa, this is some naughty stuff. So you're looking at several decades ago where we started realizing, and then of course this may be a question later, but then we had neighbors who lived close to it, especially south of it, especially south of the actual ponds themselves, that were getting a higher level of cancer. And that was another wow moment, because it was very quantifiable. What seemed to be going on, not like actually solidifying it, but it was a quantifiable.
Right. So during that time then, when there's more a quantifiable way to see like how this is affecting people, was there any immediate response from the local government or the EPA at this time?
As far as like what we suspected may have been happening with it, no. No, because it was quantifiable as far as a layperson, but of course government and responsible parties, it was not even a factor. It was just basically that, okay, this is now a Superfund site, it's got to be cleaned because for the most part it's going into Pensacola Bay. It's impacting the environment, but to this day, even though we've asked for studies and there's been a few or something like that, it's never been, yes, A plus B equaled C, which was cancer. So no, it's never been a solid fact.
At this time then, where it seems like the community knows what's going on, people are getting health issues, but you can't like quantify it as a solid fact. Do you feel like the media presence was covering this situation in a way that was helpful or accurate back then at that time?
There was no media coverage whatsoever. Sanders Beach, we were an enclosed ecosystem when it came to the creosote plant, because even to this day, once again, even to this day, people coming into the neighborhood, they have no idea what that 18-acre site, I'm looking on Google Maps now, or Google Satellite, so there was absolutely no coverage. Even when the EPA stepped in, there may have been like a little blurb on page 4 or something. Oh, you're gonna see the EPA there. Oh, the new EPA. But no, we just had a type of coverage, I think sometime earlier this year, and it was, I can't remember. It was basically how the money was being spent. Whoever it was that stepped in, I apologize on that one. But yeah, there's no media coverage. To this day, I could go around town to people who've lived here all their lives and like, hey, you know about the ACW and the Pensacola Creosote Works? What's that? We have people who've lived here all their lives that don't know what Sanders Beach is in general. So if that tells you anything, that's why I call this the hidden gem of Pensacola, because we're absolutely gorgeous, we're right on the water, but good Lord, there's a lot of people that don't even know we exist.
Right. So kind of to help me understand, could you give a timeline then of between when, okay, this is a serious like health problem after the bankruptcy, kind of to modern day on what that media coverage was looking like then, or just non-existent and now recently it's picked up?
Non-existent, and now it's, the only reason why we had media coverage was money. It was nothing about the impact, it was nothing about anything but why is the EPA spending X amount of millions of dollars, this. That's the coverage, money. Doesn't matter that the creosote plant had been leaking into the sand and clay aquifer that goes into the bay. Nothing to do with the health concerns of the neighborhood, nothing to do with the fact that it's close to 100 years old and still leaking into the sand and clay aquifer and people's yards. It was money. It was literally like, what's the EPA doing? What is this? And why are they doing it? Money. That's it. That's it. Really.
So it seems then like the pressure has been on the community to bring any attention to this at all. Do you feel like the community has been the primary way then of speaking to the EPA and local government officials to help like remediate this site?
Yeah, so about 41 years after the bankruptcy, and then no one was being held accountable for any of it, Sanders Beach and the residents, the ones that have passed away, the ones that are still with us, and now the new ones, really have been almost the only medium between the EPA and us. Keith Wilkins, he, as city administrator, he stepped in, and he was about the only one. It didn't seem like any transition of any mayor, including the one we have now, not really bashing him, but as far as the local government interaction with us, and I guess we can get into that later, but there's been very little. Sanders Beach and the residents have done the bulk, if not all, of the legwork. Meeting with the EPA, the different renditions of Peter Thorpe, who is an amazing man. It's been us. We're the ones that have made decisions. We're the ones that have asked for help. We're the ones that have allowed core samples. We're the ones that have decided on what we call number 2 as far as the layout. It's been us the whole time until June of this year. So if that gives you a timeline.
Right. So for the community then, what has been kind of, in recent years, could you kind of talk about the community's role right now as things are picking up? And sorry, this is a lot at once, but maybe just talk about where we are right now then, because a lot of things have been going on recently.
Well, right now, the way I've explained it as president, and then of course everybody understands this, is since once the site was handed over from the Army Corps of Engineers to EPA, it has been a very slow uphill battle, but we've been moving. And a few years ago, three years ago, I believe, when we knew that $40 million was secured, and it was in a bank, and that was here, and now we're actually going this way. So it's becoming easier because now everything is becoming mostly autonomous, so that we know the money is there. We definitely know what the remediation is going to look like. We know technically what that's going to look like. We know the cleanup of the neighborhood. There's 65 mostly residents, a few businesses. So over the course of 3 years, the train that was on the uphill battle hit its peak, and now it's coming down. And then we can start getting into other things with the neighborhood. But you're looking at 39 years that train's been going slowly up the hill. And finally, we're seeing results very quickly. Does that answer that question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Could you talk a little about what the site's remediation looks like?
As far as what they're going to do?
Yes.
Oh, boy. So it has taken, and for good reason, because it's a big site. It's a big site with a lot of contamination that's going everywhere. A lot of the time frame was figuring out exactly the levels of contamination, how it had flowed, where it had gone, what it was doing, the levels up and down in the dirt. Then the EPA they were testing out different methods on site, things that are going to work, how deep they have to go. So the plan has now become this. In a nutshell, but I can explain it deeper, is to entomb the site. So they know that I think it's about 120 feet down is a clay layer. And that clay layer is solid. Nothing passes that clay layer. Somewhere in there is the sand and clay aquifer that's flowing into the bay, and that's being contaminated, of course. So the clay layer is going to be the base of the tomb. And what they're going to do is, the first thing they've done is start clearing the site out of all the test wells and the temporary buildings and all that stuff, and fencing and all that stuff. Basically getting all that stuff out of there. To come into the neighborhood, they've tested all the sites. I let them come in. I let them come in my yard whenever they want. They know the levels of contamination in the neighborhood, where it's at. Is to take that dirt up to a certain point, depth, bring it to the site, onto what we call Mount Olympus, which is the mound which is on the west side of the property. That will be the primary site of the tomb. Once that's done, and they give you good dirt in your neighborhood and stuff, they will start taking other dirt from the other parts of the property, bring it to Mount Olympus. They will build, and this is all according to Plan 2, which is what the neighborhood wanted to see as far as reuse. They'll start doing slurry walls, so they will take and build actual entombment walls around what is essentially the original creosote vat. all the extra dirt goes on there. Then they have a synthetic cap on top of that, impermeable. Then they'll put approximately 3 feet of good dirt on that, and then Mount Olympus is done. And then next to that will be a detention or retention pond for flow off of that. And then the most eastern side, I think it's 4.8 acres, will become a usable park. And then they'll do thermal extraction. They'll do thermal extraction while they're doing the cap or before the cap. They're going to introduce microbes into it that love to chew on creosote and the dioxin and stuff like that. So, there's so many pieces and parts to this. So yeah, they'll do thermal extraction to try and get as much as they can so there's not as much contamination. And then the microbes, which was actually introduced by a neighbor forever ago and asked about that, and then EPA researched it and thought it was a good idea. So all the naughty dirt, I call it naughty dirt, will be entombed after a thermal extraction to try and help it a little bit, and then the microbes can sit there and chew away for 100 years or something like that. Whew. It's a lot. Yeah. It's a lot. And then trying to retain all of this is a lot. Sorry, okay.
Thank you. That was great. I definitely have a better understanding of what's going on with the site itself. But is there any concern for the surrounding neighborhood, even though the site's being remediated? I know you had spoke about you didn't even want to walk in the dirt outside of the site, and after it rains, flooding, things like that.
Once the remediation's done, once the yards are cleaned down to, I think, Florida specs, everything should be good. The only place that will still be, and it needs a lot more remediation than it already has, and that's a whole other story, is Pensacola Yacht Club. That was the primary spot that we were told not to walk through, just because the water retained there, because there's actually an underground river also. So the water it doesn't percolate down very fast. But the neighborhood knows that once the remediation is done, once the yards are clean, once the cap's in place and everything else, we should be good. We should be good. There shouldn't be any worry about this, that, and the other. We shouldn't smell the creosote anymore. A lot of that creosote smell, honestly, comes out of the, which I'm sure is not good, comes out of the rainwater drains. You can go, there's 2 blocks of the road, of Cypress Street, and it's always there. So that smell that we've been used to for so long that's slowly dissipated, it should be completely gone. So once the remediation is done, we don't think there's going to be any issues. And generations after us can be like, fine.
Thank you. That's great. I mean, that's a huge accomplishment for the community that, I mean, this will finally be getting remediated and take off the, fears associated with it. Kind of jumping around, at the beginning, you had talked about new residents coming in. How have the newer residents, developers, and changes like short-term rentals impacted the neighborhood?
As far as our growth?
As far as growth, and then also just their knowledge of the site and being able to kind of work around them.
Well, going back to, and we'd asked the city and the tax collector's offices forever, and then we finally got kind of an obscure answer. But once again, you're having people coming into the neighborhood and not knowing what's going on. We have new house builds on Pine Street, and Pine Street is just south of the creosote plant, that super contaminated and had no idea. And then they had construction workers coming in, digging up dirt, poofing all over the neighborhood. And we were like, hey, do you smell that? Do you smell that smell? And they're like, yeah. And that's, So I have felt bad for the people who have bought into the Sanders Beach, especially on properties that were heavily contaminated, that did not know, and I'll give you another story after this, that did not know what they were getting into, but also slightly didn't do their due diligence. They're like, what is this 18-acre site half a block away from me? and never asked. But I do not blame them for that. It's just a little bit of due diligence. I've talked to every neighbor that has built and didn't know. Like I said, we've had a few people who have been like, we're out, this is insane, after spending the money. But the city of Pensacola and the tax collector's office will not designate these properties as contaminated so that a potential buyer or developer comes in and goes, ooh. We had an example. We had a house on the corner of J and Cypress Street. Nice little old house there. Good shape, but it probably could have come down. Good sized piece of property. I remember one of the meetings, the couple had come in, demoed the house, because they wanted to build their own house. A big piece of property, small little house. They came to one of the meetings, obscurely came to one of the meetings right after they had bought and demoed the house. They're like, oh, there's a neighborhood meeting. And, sorry, I keep doing that. And unfortunately, they found out what was going on and found out their property was heavily contaminated. And they're like, holy smokearinis, Batman. And they're like, well, when do we think that the yard's going to, and this is good 10 years ago, when do we think the yard's going to be clean? Because we'd rather have it clean before we build. Oh, next year. They sat on this property for years, and now it sits for sale because they waited so long and it still hasn't. So it's sad that the city of Pensacola is so concerned about themselves getting sued for just giving out information instead of finding these things out. So, and there's tons of other stories like that, and I can spend hours in it. But the neighbors, unfortunately, we've had neighbors that just did not know, and then they built, and now they're dealing with the repercussions, and now they're upset. Some of them got really upset at the neighbors for not telling them, and they're like, you bought it and then came in, and what do you want us to do? We're telling you now. So there's a lot of stories like that, and it's kind of unfortunate.
So this is Annie Hamilton. If you can give us a sense of scale about how many times this is happening, or if you have a sense of like how often that happens and the wider impact of that.
Let me go through my head for a minute because I can actually give you a fairly accurate count because that's how nosy I am in the neighborhood in a good way. I would say, and this includes my vice president for the board. I can think of, off the top of my head, at least a dozen. And of those dozen, which I know there's a few more, I'm trying to scan the neighborhood really quick. There are some that bought blank property. There's some that bought older houses they've remodeling. And there's some that bought older houses that they demoed to put a new house on. And it runs the gamut. It runs the gamut. But I can think of at least a dozen. And of those, a majority of them, if not all, very, very, very upset about it. Very upset. And especially when we're going by timelines, and it's like, it'll be next year. The worst example of that would be the couple that bought the house, demoed it, and it is a beautiful piece of property. And it sits there. It's been sitting there for sale for about a year because they just had enough of it. They'd had enough. There's a business behind them. It's a government type business now, but it was a law office. Great building. They remodeled it, and it was the same thing. And they came in, and they're like, what in the heck? The sad part little addendum about that property and that building, now the original building's not there, but that 701 South J Street, 701 South J Street is the address for the creosote site. Because the original building, the original office building was there. And they're like, people are looking at us like, and so they're desperately trying to get that changed, and it's a big old, but it's 701 South J Street, and it's this it's not a government, it's like financial or loans or something like that, but it's not a government building, it's just what they do. But can you imagine having your property in your place, 701 South J Street, be where everybody goes like, where is this creosote site? And they go there, and they're like, oh, no. But sorry, I'm rambling. At least a dozen, if not more. And not one of them were like, "Wee, creosote."
Shocking.
Yeah, not one of them. So, anyway.
And I'm wondering if by comparison, can you sketch us a view of the Sanders Beach area to give us a sense of how big it is and maybe how many houses that encompasses, just to give us a sense of like what that dozen means?
I can't tell you like the blocks or the acreage. I believe that we're comprised of 255 or so houses and a handful of businesses. Once again, we have Joe Patty's, which is internationally known, and we're proud to have him. We have Bell Steel. I know Mr. Bell. He's a brilliant man. It's American-made steel. That's phenomenal. It's American-made steel in Sanders Beach. Perfect. We have the business 701 South J Street. I can't remember the name. We have Marine Max. We have the Ore House, which is the restaurant. We have the Hidden Gem in the Hidden Gem, which is the Sanders Beach Corey Jones Resource Center, which that alone, people like, where did this come from? And like, it's been a rendition of it for 100 years, and it's the hidden premier community center in Sanders Beach. As far as our borders go, we're to the Bay, Pensacola Bay, Pace Boulevard, all the way to A Street, which is on the other side of Joe Patty's, and then Barrancas. So and then we have a lumber company. It used to be called Owsley's, can't remember the name now, but we have a huge lumber company. So we're comprised of everything from residential to big manufacturing, but not in a bad way. You know, the bad one was the creosote plant. So we're not an insignificant neighborhood in Pensacola. Just people don't know we exist, which also makes our crime the lowest in Pensacola. People come wandering in the neighborhood. I get an Uber Eats delivery, and they're like, well, where the hell did this come from? And I had a fella, his last name was Sanders. And we have signs, and he's like, did that say Sanders Beach? I'm like, it did. My last name's Sanders. I'm like, cool. So anyway, we're a large neighborhood and not insignificant in the grand scheme of things in Pensacola. And once again, we're the neighborhood where all the people lived who built Pensacola. We have a lot of history here, a lot.
And I'll hand this back to Mattison in 1 second, but I just have a follow-up question. Just thinking about kind of the decades-long tension about people don't know that Sanders Beach exists. We've lived here since the beginnings of Pensacola, and this enduring toxicity has been well known, at least by residents, for a long time, yet there are still people moving in who don't know and then are surprised and shocked and disappointed, as well as, of course, you all working to get everything remediated. I'm thinking about what you said, that the county or the city doesn't have to disclose that these are contaminated sites. And I don't even have a fully formed question, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about, like, why is that, or how do you understand how people are getting information about these sites?
This answer came not too many months ago, believe it or not, because we were literally just still like, what? Why? You've got a map, you've got the tax collector's map, boop, 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 beep, boop. And we were told that the city did not want to be involved in legalities of someone trying to sell their property, and then the city is saying, well, it's contaminated, and then they're like, how dare you, and now I'm going to sue you. So we're like, you would think there'd be some sort of covenant or something you could put in there, go like, hey, we're just giving you federal information, okay? This isn't the city going like, ah. And it's like the city came in there and blooped a bunch of creosote down there, like, oh, we contaminated your property. It's basically a marker. We just want people to have a marker. I guarantee you that those dozen plus people would have loved to have seen the marker. Now, the other issue is the people who are selling the property, who know it's contaminated, are supposed to have a sheet from the realtor that says, I undersigned that I am not contaminated, that I have been boop, and or the opposite. And I'll be darned, I have one neighbor that I know of that just sold his house behind me that knew he wasn't contaminated. And he can't believe that people aren't signing this off. And I'll give you an oddball. It's not the worst case scenario. There was a property bought behind on Pine Street, behind Kelly. They bought it. They built a house, gorgeous heritage oak, and the company was the whole yard. Pow, like it's huge. And Kelly's got a young kid now. They found out it was contaminated. They're like, okay. And without city permission, without going to the EPA, without doing anything, next thing we know, there's workers out there cutting this heritage oak down. And it was a protected heritage oak. And Kelly's like, blankety blank blank blank, blankety blank 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 blank, blankety blank, and I'm waiting for an actual noun or a verb or something to appear. And they cut down that tree. And now they're digging up the stump. And they're making a crater. And all that dust is going in her yard. Dixie and Kelly are, they're our main tree protectors. Like we all are, but they're the ones, and if I see something, I immediately, because they'll go straight to City Hall. And she goes back to me, I was like, what are y'all doing? Yeah, we want to put a pool there. And she said, oh, okay, give me a minute. Boop, 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 calls Peter Thorpe up, and Peter's like, what the blankety blank blank blank's going on? He comes from Tallahassee, meets with the city comes down and says, oh, well, you didn't get a permit to take the tree down, we're going to have to fine you. That's all the city cared about. And Pete's like, yeah, your property is ultra contaminated. You've dug way deeper than you were supposed to or should have. And so now I'm going to block you from putting your pool in. So we lost a heritage oak. Kelly got her yard all smackarooed with dust. And now these people have a blank yard. And they'll never be able to he put a covenant in that they don't even put a jacuzzi in. It ticked him off so bad. So it's things like that. It's the gamut. It's the gamut here and there. And then, and I'll shut up about this, what you need to think about are those poor workers that had zero idea. They weren't wearing masks. They weren't doing anything. They were just doing their job. And they went deeply into excessively contaminated dirt. One more thing, actually. But then you have the city of Pensacola that comes in to put in drainage culverts. And they know there's contamination, and those city workers, this happened about 8 years ago. I'm like, good God, why can I smell creosote this bad? Well, there were city workers at the intersection of Cypress and L Street. They had blocked off it, and they had dug up it. They were as deep as this right here. And I'm like, y'all gonna die. You're gonna actually suffocate. Yeah, what is that? We thought we had a gas line in the city. I said, no, it's contaminated creosote dirt that's 100 years old. I said, y'all need to get out of this hole. And they looked at me like, dirt for dirt. I'm like, okay, well, don't die in my neighborhood, please, because I don't want to see it. And I walked off. So anyway, that's me rambling some more. Yeah.
Thank you. I guess my question then, is there anything being done to remediate the contamination in the residents' yards themselves?
Yes. No, that's been on the plan for a long time. And it's not necessarily a remediation. What the EPA did was they did soil samples everywhere. And like I said, I let them come in and do 2 core samples in my yard. They knew that I wasn't contaminated, but they wanted to be absolutely sure because there's test wells that'll be there forever. The idea that levels of contamination are different all over the place, including where the main pond was. So what they're doing is they've measured the dioxin and chemical levels, and then if they can go down, let's say a foot, they'll go down a foot, and it's fine, because a lot of this is surface where the rain has come. They'll dig just what they need to dig, take it, and it goes on Mount Olympus, and then they will give you new dirt. And if they had to take down a fence, if they had to take out your azaleas, if they had to take out a walkway or whatever, they will put it back the way it was, unless you ask them otherwise. They will not go and take out heritage oaks unless you ask them to, which then you have to get a permit. So if you have a tree in your yard that's looking kind of janky, and you're like, if you want to take this out on your dime, and they'll do it. But for the most part, if they get around to heritage oak or something that like Dixie has, she's completely freaking out. they'll hand dig around it because they do need to get as much as they can around it and not damage the tree. So the remediation for the neighborhood is kind of a manual. Take the dirt, Mount Olympus, new dirt, boop, done. And then once the tomb is built, there should be no more surface contamination. There should be no more runoff. And there won't be. I say should be, there won't be. So that is the remediation for the neighborhoods and the few businesses that need to be fixed.
Thank you. So will this remediation be taking place at the same time the work on the site itself is going to begin, or is this on a different timeline?
It's honestly, it's a symbiosis because they've already started working on the site. Like I said, I have pictures, but where they had to get junk, like old junk, like junk that's been around for decades, like the fence, some old fencing, concrete, parts of the original site that was still there, not dirt, but like things, concrete. They had old buildings that were sucking up the water and DNAP, all that stuff. So they're basically clearing out all the human-made things in the site. So that's already started. And as the neighborhood gets clean, that dirt goes to Mount Olympus. And then, of course, they start building Mount Olympus. We know that the height of Mount Olympus will be 23 feet above L Street at its height, at its maximum height, or 36 feet above something sea level. There's always something, I can never remember. But 23 feet will be the highest that Mount Olympus will go, and it'll taper off and all this magic stuff. It'll comprise about close to 3 blocks. The highest point would be closer to L Street, so the most westward end. So to answer your question is, it's an orchestrated event. It's not this, then that. It's all the above, where actually the site's already in progress to receive the dirt, which Pete has assured us it will start next year, maybe late first quarter, early second quarter. But he is now very sure, because he said his boss is getting tired of it, and his boss is like, Pete, let's go. Here's the money, let's go. So, and that money needed to be spent. That money needed to be spent and started because we were in a governmental transition phase. Y'all know these things here. That was Kelly's biggest point. She was like, I don't want things to change before this starts. And predictions sort of came true from her mouth, and I'm going to knock her out for that. I'm kidding, I'm not violent. But I'm going to tell her it's her fault. So anyway, that's why it's all starting. It's an orchestrated event. So we got to get that money flowing now.
Right. Right. Thank you.
Yes.
So back on the timeline, what is the hope then when this will be done? There will be a park, residents' houses their yards will be clean. Is that in the near future? Is there a date, a year?
When the remediation of the neighborhood starts, meaning like the cleanup, Pete said he will be able to give me a day and a time when those bulldozers will start coming down. He has assured me that it will, like I said, it'll start late first quarter or early second quarter. That remediation will take between 6 and 8 months, meaning it'll take 6 to 8 months. They'll be rumbling through the neighborhood, and I've told everybody, you're just gonna have to calm down about it, because you either get it done or you don't. Don't sit there and complain about trucks. Please don't. You can complain about the city roads that they won't fix and if the truck goes in the hole. Well, guess what? We told them so. The site itself, HDR, which is the company that did the technical layout from what we asked, and all the magic numbers, they said 5 to 6 years. Pete says he thinks they're really overshooting it. So he's thinking 3 to 4. We were originally told 2 to 3, but now that we know the level, extent of things going on. So we're thinking that the entirety of the remediation phase will be 3 to 4 years. Dealing with the city of Pensacola, the usable part, the 4.8 acres, will probably be grass they don't mow for, 30 or 40 years. Totally kidding. We've been told by the CRA, the West Side CRA, that once the site is handed back to the city, They're working on getting the money now to make it. It used to be, it was going to be a passive park. Now it doesn't necessarily have to be a passive park because they've shifted it from the center of the site to the east side. So I'm going to think that it'll be something that a child can go and play on maybe in about 8 years, maybe 7. It really depends. They're not going to know the exact time frame for the site remediation until they really get into it, when they get into the meat of it. So I'm going to say 8 years.
Thank you. As the ACW site reaches its final stages of remediation, what are your hopes for the future of Sanders Beach?
Sanders Beach it's been resilient. It's existed in one form or fashion. It's evolved. Some of it has de-evolved. We're always going to be waterfront property, more so in about 50 years. My house will be waterfront property. It's always been resilient, and that's the cool thing about any city or town. It evolves, it'll de-evolve, it'll evolve higher, it'll evolve lower. Sanders Beach, the history of it it'll always continue thanks to things like this, for one. Thank you so much again. But we're hoping to preserve as many of our old houses as possible. That's why we're pretty much not letting the CRA come any farther south than Pine Street. We have control over what's going on. We have control. We have people that are starting to renovate the old houses and keep the heritage. We've got some that were heavily damaged during Ivan and they're being replaced. We have the last 2 pieces of beachfront property in the city of Pensacola, in Sanders Beach. One of them is for sale. It's bopped a few times. We have one that's bopped a few times and now it's contingent. It's just a constant evolution. The old dogs will fade away, but everything that we know will stay. And everything we did now will make a park that will last hopefully forever. So Sanders Beach will exist as Sanders Beach forever and do like everything else. It'll evolve, it'll change, and some of it will hopefully stay the same.
Thank you. I mean, the community's efforts and resilience, just like you said, have really brought this to where in the next 3 to 4 years it will be remediated, and the community will forever have you guys to be thankful for that. Thank you for sharing this. I just wanted to open it up for my colleagues if you guys had any questions to ask before we wrap up.
Hi, I'm Liya, Johny. So last time we interviewed Keith, he had briefly mentioned an organization called SCIO, which I touched more up on over summer and became really interested in. So if it's okay with everyone, I have a few questions. Okay, perfect. So considering that SCIO operates in Charlottesville, Virginia, if I'm correct.
I'm going to say yes, because
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure.
How do they network with you, and how are they involved in the cleanup process?
SCIO it's really a design company. They're not a cleanup company.
Okay.
SCIO was brought in several years ago by the EPA, i.e. Pete. They came in to, SCIO has done designs around the United States as far as parks and remediated areas. So they were Pete's first choice to come in because the neighborhood was like, okay, if we can see something that's quantifiable on our end, like we know, okay, dirt and mounds and all that stuff. SCIO came in through the EPA, through EPA money, and has been working with the neighborhood quite a bit. Gosh darn, I keep hitting that thing. Quite a bit. We've met them, I think, once or twice in person, but mostly it's Zoom. But they've been instrumental in starting the process of quantifying what it'll actually look like with greenery, like the architecture of everything in the park. So they have nothing to do with the remediation part, but the actual landscaping and the park spot. And even that, unfortunately, has changed quite a bit. So I've personally told them that I want to have them not go anywhere, even though the city of Pensacola has decided that they're going with some company. So that's SCIO. So SCIO's been around for several years, and I very much I like them all. They're very cool.
Okay, thank you. So in this current remediation process with what we've seen since summer, have they been present at all, or is it will they be more prevalent once the cleanup is kind of done?
The last meeting I had, because now we are forced the city to have a monthly meeting with us down at City Hall, which I've gone to every one of them. They tend to be at a majority of those meetings on Zoom. Once again, in June, so many things changed that there's another company that is now working with Pensacola for something called Strive 2035. They have brought in their own plans in accordance to number 2. I could tell from the atmosphere during the last meeting, SCIO is a little bit on the myth side about it. But I've assured them that they will not go anywhere as long as EPA wants to pay for them. We like their designs. I could not get an appropriate answer if the if there was going to be a bidding process for this from the city. But as long as they can get paid by EPA, they're going to stay on board because I've asked Pete to do that.
Okay. So how much do you trust the EPA in this process?
She had a great smile.
Sorry.
Now, let's go back to that whole thing where I was doing this. I trust the EPA quite a bit. I can only go by what has happened here at Sanders Beach, because that is not my expertise, but that's the EPA. Pete's position has transitioned, I believe, 3 times, maybe 4. So the folks that were before him, they started the process. There wasn't a lot of paperwork done. Like even when Pete came here, he said, there's got to be 120 test wells, and I can't find 80 of them because the paperwork wasn't that great. As far as EPA with this particular Superfund site, I think it's been now well documented. I think that the process is well done. They're expediting it the best they can with the money they do and don't have. Everything that we've been told has been an evolution because this is a big site. And it's not like the EPA has done dozens and dozens and dozens of creosote sites that have had this much contamination over a large neighborhood that I know of. So the long story short is I trust the EPA. I would prefer them not to be taken out of the equation. I'm going to do this again, like this. No, I trust the EPA. I trust that they will do a perfect job with us and they'll clean us up. And the whole thing of a 100-year creosote plant will be a memory and a park, and we'll have a plaque, and they'll be done with it.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I have a number of questions. Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay. Thanks for sticking with us as we pass this around.
My time is your time. I can stay all day. Not
Careful what you offer.
Day.
No, I think we could ask you endless questions until your voice gave out. I have a couple of follow-up questions based off of what Mattison's asked you. So again, I'm gonna jump around a little bit, which I hope that's okay. For someone who doesn't know what creosote smells like, what does it smell like?
Let me think for a minute. It's a unique smell. Take gasoline. We all know what gasoline smells like. Do you know what turpentine smells like? Okay, too young. That's fine. It's a mixture. It's a very, very potent. It's a very potent mixture that it'll make your eyes water. If it's gasoline, turpentine. You ever smelled paint thinner? Whee, paint thinner. So mix up as many things in your head that you wouldn't want to put on your skin, drink, get in your eyes, get nearer, or smell. Put those together, and that's creosote. It's an extremely powerful, even to this day. Like I said, you can smell it even to this day. Not as much as, but it's an eye-watering experience. It is. Very potent.
Do you remember the first time you smelled it?
Oh, I don't, but I'm sure I was smelling it when I was a baby. Yeah, like I said, it was very prevalent in the neighborhood. I think probably my earliest memories of knowing what I was smelling was about when I was 7. That's as far back as my brain goes, I think, is about 7. But yeah, you knew the smell. And there was parts of the streets that you knew, like, let's see how long I can hold my breath. Especially on a summer day. Summers were the worst because summers, that heat just made it just very pronounced. Winters were a little bit better. Yeah, and once again, if it rained, you just knew to stay on concrete or asphalt, but you could still smell it.
So we've heard from you and a few other folks we've spoken to about the health risks that this exposure has posed over time. Not that there's anything we can necessarily prove or draw specific conclusions about, but there seems to be some sort of thing happening. Can you talk about the earliest case that you can think of where maybe, there may be something here because this neighbor or this family member is having these complications?
That would probably be Dixie. Dixie's actually the one that really brought it more into light than literally talked about it. She's a multi-cancer survivor. She just had one of her eyes taken out. She's had multiple cancers. And she's the one, because of her proximity to the site, and then the proximities that she was with neighbors around her who have passed, is probably the one that brought it to light. And so decades and decades, she's known ever since she came up with the conclusion decades and decades and decades ago when people started passing away. Now, even though my house is not near the creosote plant, my family dealt a lot with it, close to it. My grandmother and her 3 sisters died of cancer. The 3 sisters died of colon cancer. My grandmother died of cervical? I always thought it, my mom, I was talking to my mom about it, but they all died of cancer. And you just know a lot of people that in Sanders Beach that passed away from cancer that it seemed to, of course we didn't get out of the neighborhood that much, but it seemed to be kind of a high number, It just seemed to be a kind of a high number. But I do know that in my family, knock on wood, I'm okay right now, but not that it should impact me now. But yeah, a really good case would be at least my grandmother and her 3 sisters all died of cancer. And my grandmother passed away when I was 11. So that was a long time ago. And she was 63, 64. And the sisters were about the same age and lived there all their life.
When did people in the neighborhood kind of start to think, maybe there's a linkage here?
That's definitely a Dixie question. I'm thinking at least 30, 40 years ago. I mean, I'm thinking like as it was winding down. That's my guess. It's not like, oops, last year, like, it's been a long time. Dixie, if you go, because I know y'all interviewed Dixie. I don't know if maybe y'all posed that to her. Dixie really is, even if y'all just maybe text her or something, but it's been decades. Because I remember decades ago, Dixie was advocating for University of West Florida to come in and hospitals and see if they could start tracking it with what they had. And this has been decades ago. But yeah, Dixie's a multi-cancer survivor. I don't know how to really say it. Yeah, so, it's been decades. It has to have been, because I remember all this decades ago.
And knowing that, and you've talked to us today about, especially some of the new folks coming in and saying, wait a second, I didn't realize the contamination, I'm out of here, as well as some of the long-timers who are saying like, maybe I've had enough or it's time for me to move on. Can you tell us a little bit about those conversations in the neighborhood about folks who are deciding to stay or deciding to leave and what those choices have looked like?
It's a gamut, because I'll give you one example. We had a fella and his wife come in, bought property that wasn't contaminated, but they came from Washington or something. Really nice. She didn't like it here. When they found out about the contamination, she really didn't like it here, because she knew people in her life and watching all this stuff that had cancer, and of course it's a heavy carcinogen. We know that creosote and the dioxin are heavy carcinogens. And then Hurricane Sally hit, and she's like, yeah, this is, I don't even know, where are we? Like, this is on another planet. And so they sold. You've had some that have really, they're like, this sucks, and they don't care and dig big holes for pools. Then you've got some people who come in, demolish a house, wait for years, decide it was enough, time to go. Then you've got people that built a house, and there's one house where they built it and they're like, oh, you know what? We know the yard's gonna get cleaned up, and they've been putting hay. They don't even put any, just hay, because they don't want to do anything nice, couple palm trees. They've been waiting for years. Her husband has since passed away, not from creosote, passed away. There's some people that are excessively angry. Kelly and Chris Schweer, when they first got here, and he became president of the neighborhood association and vice president, and for a year, she was so angry, and finally got her to admit some of this, but she was so angry and so much disbelief, and Chris thought he knew more about creosote than we did, that for a full year, it took us, hey, we kind of know what we're talking about. She even made, during an EPA meeting, she's like, well, obviously the neighborhood, didn't do enough to get this fixed, and just going off on us. And we're like, we've heard this before. Not this violent, but because she was young. And she was gonna have, have a kid or something. And then Chris was the one that his wife was like, peace out, we're done. And man, it took a year for us to, like, literally your president and vice president magically coming in the neighborhood, calm down. It sucks, but my God, listen to us. And it was a wild year. So it's been a mixed bag. It's been a mixed bag. And then the old dogs are like, yeah, creosote sucks. Eventually they'll fix it. We have one, Johny. Now she was a champion beyond champion. And all the lies, all the next years, and she's like, I'm done. I've had enough of it. And her yard is contaminated. Her yard's beautiful. She has a butterfly sanctuary in the back. She has a well that's as old as Methuselah that they made her close, and now finally she can open it back up again. But Johny she's in her 80s, and she's like, nobody would listen to me. We're going to all these meetings. The EPA's doing what they can, but of course the money, So she's like, whatever. She wants to sell her house and move to a little cabin and go fishing for the rest of her life. And I'm like, Johny, I don't blame you. And she's lived there early 70s. So she's been there a while. Not an old dog, but she's an old dog. So it's a mixed bag all the way through. The general consensus is we need this done.
And thinking about your place in all of this, I mean, this work feels to us, so I'm projecting, I'm sorry about that, but feels all consuming. You're serving the role of a scientist, of an historian, of a community advocate, of like an urban planner. You're really walking all of these lines, and it's not your full-time job. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if you can talk to us about why this feels important for you to do.
To be here with y'all?
To do this work in Sanders Beach, and to carry this history forward, and to advocate for remediation, and to be here with us.
Well, once again, thank you all so much for what you're doing. I'm going to reiterate that several times. This is how we learn. This is how we preserve things that are going to the wayside. We can look at Egyptian pyramids, and they're there. We're like, but okay, well, things get lost in time, and then we have to preserve the past to learn from it. So, all that being said, and I've told Kelly this for Enzo, her kid. This has been going on for a while as far as the creosote plant. Nobody that established it exists anymore. They're gone. There's no one to blame. There's no one to blame except greed. And greed is not a person you can point at. You know what I mean? It's not a thing that you can yell at. You can do it in the air in your own time. So the creosote plant was a gift of greed. And those greedy people are now gone into the ether, like literally gone. Every city, every state, every neighborhood, anywhere, including the United States, and they have to champion themselves. You have to be the single person that starts the process. Then you have to be the group that starts it, and then the collective that starts it, and then you move onward to that. And then when you get to that point where people stop caring and you've reached the maximum amount of people, even if it's one, but it's something that you feel wholeheartedly about, you keep going. You never quit. The creosote plant, if it was left to its own devices, would continue to contaminate the neighborhood more and spread. It would contaminate the Pensacola Bay more forever, killing off wildlife and making the bay unusable in an area. You have people that they need to care. Recently, we have a lot of people that don't care. Y'all gonna do this when you go home and know exactly. You're gonna be like, God, Mike did that. So you have to care. You have to care. You have to care at the local level. You have to care as an individual and as a human being that knows right from wrong. So that's it. My legacy will be local, along with everybody else in the neighborhood. It's a legacy. You leave a legacy a lot of times anonymously, but you know that in 10 years, people will be playing on that park, and it will be the Frank Dent Sanders Park. I'm going to make sure of that. And that's a legacy. Yeah, everything else, cleaning the bay, cleaning the neighborhoods, everything else. So that's it. There's reasonings, but it's really, you have to be a human. You have to be a caring human who knows right from wrong. And this is wrong. But there's nobody to account for except greed, which is, okay, I'm done. I'm done. Kidding.
I just have a couple more questions. I hope that's okay.
I can't believe I did that part either. I'm so traumatized. Go ahead, please do.
We appreciate you showing up authentically.
You're welcome.
So you helped us understand a good timeline, but I heard you say until June 2nd of this year, and you talked about the CRA a little bit, but I'm wondering if you can kind of help us understand, number one, what the CRA is and what its relationship is to the community association. And I know things have ramped up, but that feels kind of like an important piece to me. And I hope that's okay that I asked you that question.
That's quite all right. I mean, trust me. Monday was interesting for this past Monday for the CRA. Normally we have our neighborhood meetings on Tuesday. They need to have it on Monday because, God forbid, the city of Pensacola is so busy. So we accommodated them. The CRA stands for Community Redevelopment Agency. It is a thing that was put in place by the state of Florida. I'll let you do your own research. Here in Pensacola, it's broken up. Downtown, something, and then West Side. So the West Side CRA is who we're dealing with, but it's the CRA in general. In 2006, let me do that. In 2006, the CRA came to us, the West Side CRA came to Sanders Beach and said, hey, and if you're not sure what the CRA does, by the way, CRA is designed to help cities and stuff with blight, with development, with redevelopment, CRA, redevelopment. They're designed to come in and take tax dollars from the area they're in, keep them, and use them to help blight. Their biggest thing, if you look on the website, is blight. And that's what they're designed for. They're designed to make communities better by giving very low interest loans or coming in and fixing roads and all that stuff. In 2006, West Side CRA came to Sanders Beach and said, Razzmatazz, hey, we're the CRA and we're kind of new here, and we noticed you got a lot of blight. And we're like, we just had a hurricane. What? Like literally, it's like, you know what? We see what the CRA is doing north of us, north of Main Street. We're good. We're good. Kind of hit us in the sore spot because we're right on the water and you're razzmatazzing that we're full of blight and there's still tarps on roofs. So we told them, slow your roll. This is a convoluted story. We thought we were good. Sanders Beach, no CRA, we're doing our best. June, can't remember the date, I got a call from Kelly. Blankety blank, 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 but once again, Kelly doesn't swear all the time. She's like, you're not gonna believe this, but the CRA called Peter Thorpe down to have a meeting with them. A meeting. And Peter's like contacting me and Keith, and they're like, what the hell was that? And the meeting was this. So they wanted Pete to come in because CRA was like, ACW, and we've got this Strive 2035 thing, and we're we're razzmatazzing the whole city. And I mean, I'm using razzmatazz because I really want to say swear words. But, and they had Pete come in to talk about the ACW site. And Pete's like, okay. And Pete was like, where's the neighborhood? Oh no, this is CRA. And how are you doing? And okay. And they're like, yeah, we're looking at these designs and we noticed this, and we just thought we'd have you come in here and tell us about the time frame to getting this cleaned up and everything. And this is really how it was going. Like, they have to justify themselves. And Pete's like, okay, well, here we go, pop, 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 pop. And number 2, and here's a mound and usable space. At the time, it was a 60% thing. And then the park, and they're like, literally, the head of the CRA got furious and like, how the hell do you put a parking lot on a mound? And Pete's like, what do you mean a parking lot? A parking lot. We're looking at this thing here. Parking lot. And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Keith was there, and Keith was like, we need to call Kelly. They wouldn't call her. They didn't care. They didn't want to call Kelly. They didn't want to involve the neighborhood. And Pete's like, well, this was voted on by the neighborhood a year or 2 ago. We gave them 3 choices, number 2. They lost their minds. Okay. All right, Kelly, I gotta do some investigating. And an email thread started with Westside CRA, who is part of the CRA, Keith and all these people. And I'm like, wait a minute. They're using a plan from 18 years ago. They're using plans from 18 years ago before we knew what was really going on with ACW, that we thought, oh yeah, we'll have houses. It was like a corridor restructuring, get rid of the lumber company. The city had told us that they owned that property and they were leasing it, which was a lie. And they were looking at an 18-year-old architectural plan that we had put together about, wouldn't this be cool? 18-year-old document. So I'm like, hey, Victoria, it's a little old, and They sent me the same damn document. They're like, oh, here's the document. I'm like, I've seen their document. You don't need to see it again. It's 18 years old. So going back, that was June of this year. Going back to 2006, after we had told them, thank you so much, CRA, we got it. The CRA, without telling us, without informing us, without asking us, surgically placed 1/3 of Sanders Beach into the Westside CRA. And when I say surgical, if I had it right here in front of me, without really y'all knowing exactly the creosote site, they came from Barrancas down L Street, along a little bit of I call it the Dorito of the site, down Pine Street, which is the southern end, up F Street, which is on the most western end, down Gimble Street, all the way to A Street. Surgical, and it's about 1/3. In 2006, 2007, there was another grand scheme by the city of Pensacola to do the Main Street corridor remediation or restructure. In order for the CRA to do that, since the Westside CRA, they would have to have control over the northern and southern part of Main Street, which brought them into Sanders Beach. Now, if the CRA was so concerned about blight and so concerned about everything else, they would have said, hey, this is our plans, this is what we'd like to do, let us just include all of you, blah, 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 sorry about the blight thing, blah, 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 blah. No, they did it without our consent, without us knowing anything. And when I say surgical, so Joe Patty's, if you look at a satellite map, there's Joe Patty's, awesome. Here's the structure of Joe Patty's, all right? And then you have the big parking lot in Main Street. So the CRA sliced through between the parking lot and the Joe Patty's over to A Street, because Gimble Street originally used to go through that way. So they separated a business's parking lot from the business, because that parking lot's next to Main Street. They separated Bell Steel, which is now on both sides of the CRA. So there's a southern part below Gimble and a northern part. They took some of the houses from Sanders Beach. They took, sorry about that again, they took the lumber company, which, whatever, because that's on Main Street, but they specifically went down to grab the ACW because they saw this plan in 2006. They're like, oh my God, that's great. For 18 years, 19 years, 18 years, we've never seen hide nor hair of the CRA at any of our meetings. We would have gladly invited them. We knew nothing about it until June. And then literally hell itself opened up. And we're like, what's going on here? Pete had no idea, nothing. So, told Keith started the meetings. He's like, no, there's a communication issue here and this is ridiculous. So it took a few of these meetings for me to finally look at the head of the CRA downtown and say, you, in whatever rendition back then, acquired a third of Sanders Beach for this very purpose. You were in Sanders Beach, we asked you not to. Joe, who was the president of Tanyard, which is a huge part, he said, when I told him this story, he's like, Mike, it makes sense because the CRA came to me and asked me if I had any old maps of the neighborhoods. They were trying to figure out if what we were saying was true or if we had any merit to what we were saying. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is wild, here you go. Here's a map. Finally got them to realize that they can't do like the city normally does and railroad people, and admitted it and have included us now in everything. And the idea is that we're not going to play ball with them, they're going to play ball with us. They realized that they just stepped in after 18 years because now there's $40 million for the remediation. And oh my God, they've got Strive 2035, even after the failed attempt at doing the Main Street corridor remediation, all of this. And now, of course, there are people that, I hate saying it, justifying their jobs. It's another thing the city's going to try to do. They've brought in another company to do all from somewhere, Philadelphia or something, real nice folks. And all of a sudden, the CRA is now back in the limelight. They're posting, now they're all nice people, but they literally came in, tried to run us over. They're going to try to say that 40-something years worth of our work was theirs. And literally for almost 2 decades, they had nothing to do with us as a neighborhood. I've even had to reiterate, I don't care at this point what you do with the property. You will not, by even a minute, stall the cleanup of the neighborhood. I said, you won't do it. I've been nice but stern, and so that's the CRA. The CRA came in like gangbusters after 18 years, literally, and showed an 18-year-old plan to all the people of the magic world. And we're like, we knew that plan wasn't going to work almost less than a year after we put it in, we showed it. Because they started to know the level of the dachshunds, the level of and they're like, yeah, this property ain't going to never be nothing like this. An addendum to that is this. Sorry, rambling. We finally saw the 100% remediation, and this company, HDR, comes in, and if you look at a map like this, and you just take the ACW property like this, all right? So we had put Mount Olympus here, west side, over here by L Street, the usable area in the middle, and then the detention pond down here. Well, the 100%, when HDR came in and really started looking, they had to switch things around. They're like, if y'all are really concerned about flooding, which we were, mound, water, pond, play area. And we're like, that makes sense. But because the CRA had gotten involved, we wanted to be sure that from the EPA and HDR, that the CRA had no say in the switching, and HDR, absolutely not, this is how this has to go. And they're like, so what we're doing is we're taking what you want, but we've got to have that pond in its best usable spot for the runoff. And we're like, okay. The property on the east side is now more usable than it would have been here. So this is practically, they have to take all the trees out, we can get more trees. So 4.8 acres. And so one of the meetings was with Pete, what can happen here? He said, well, no residential, it could be commercial. Pete's still in the dark about really what the CRA was doing. And we're like, ooh, we don't like that at all. So the last meeting we had with Pete a month or two ago, he came 30 minutes early, and I sat him down. I said, Pete, let's have a talk. I think you need the Cliff Notes version. And I explained to him everything I just explained to him, to you. And I said, we're concerned now that because the CRA is there and this property is now viable for commercial, they're going to sell it or they're going to use it for something we don't. because I had asked about covenants before, and I had told the CRA, right now we'll work as a good faith that you'll do what we asked for since we're dealing with it. And Pete was like, Mike, this whole thing is, I'm so flabbergasted by all this. And I literally, in 30 minutes, he's like, I appreciate you explaining this to me because now I know why the heck they brought me in and everything else. He said, nah. He said, I'll make the covenant. He said, we'll put this at the federal level. He said, I'll make sure it can't be anything but the park y'all want. So it's been a wild ride. And just since June. And so now we're going to have a federal whatever covenant by the EPA because our trust in the city of Pensacola and the CRA is a little bit on the lax. We're just, oof. So anyway, he's going to make sure that it's not developed, the city can't develop it into anything but what we want. We don't even care if they keep it grass. We just don't want anything developed on it because it's in a residential. So now, like I said, CRA knows they got to play ball with us and not vice versa. And this is going to be, and I'm sorry, I'm rambling again. Total other thing that none of y'all have asked me, I also don't want to go over your time. Do you know that 70% of that site, of the creosote site, about 70% is actually privately owned? I know, you're laughing like us. About 7 years ago, somehow, because it's different parcels, it's not one big thing, and then of course there's a train track that used to go through there. About 7 years ago, magically, 3 huge parcels on the site went up for tax auction. Unpaid taxes. Unpaid taxes. That were $0. Okay? A gentleman by the name of Mr. Rawls Law Firm, comes in and goes like, I'll take a lot of those acres for $8,000. $8,000. We don't know how the hell it happened. The city council didn't know how it happened. And we're like, well, just get it back. And like, we can't. And we're like, what do you mean you can't? So he actually became one of our first issues with, if this man who is a geological, he was a lawyer for oil fields, knew so much more about all this stuff than we did, or the EPA, and he's going to develop it, and it's wasteland. That's what the zoning is. And he's owned for $8,000, 70% or so of the creosote plant. And we're like, this needs to be fixed because, and even Pete was like, what? Pete was like, back then, like, what? How did this happen? How the hell did that, how? And so Pete said, you've got to get that back from him, and because this is going to cause an issue with the remediation. And it's like, we have to remediate it, and he may be liable for millions of dollars, and it's going to be the end of it. 2.5 years ago, the city finally was like, all right, we'll get the lawyers on it, start getting that eminent domain, all this stuff. And for a year and a half, they didn't do anything. And we didn't find out. Pete didn't find out until the beginning of this year that the city had dropped the ball on it. And the Pete's like, yeah, we're getting ready to do this stuff. Why am I still seeing it under Rawls Law Firm? Oh, yeah, well, we've fired lawyers and we've hired lawyers and blah, blah, blah. He's like, that's not my problem. He said the EPA could come in and do it, but it's a huge pain in the butt, and it would push things so far around. So the city of Pensacola even dropped the ball on that. If the CRA had been involved, like they're supposed to be, they'd have been like, oh my God, this is... So once again, it's this cascade failure of things, and we've had to keep up with all of it, after the fact sometimes, and we present this to the city. Well, this is the addendum to that story. So the city's been working with Rawls Law Firm, and Pete's been asking him, hey, can we come on your property to get some of this fencing off? And he's like, certainly, go right ahead. EPA having to ask permission. City Council has now said that they're going to probably put aside $100,000 to buy it. The last meeting with the city we had, they found out this little bit of knowledge, and I'll leave that with you. I said, hey, Pete, I said, we're hearing about the Rawls Law Firm and all that stuff. It's now chugging along. The city wanted to back off, slow their roll with it because they heard, oh, it's going to be 5 or 6 years for the remediation. Pete says, he couldn't say to keep going. I could. I said, well, here's the thing. You dropped the ball for a year and a half. You were expediting it. Then you slowed your roll because it's not important to you. I said, now you're going to expedite it times 2. That's how this is going to happen. No ifs, ands, or buts. Get it? So they'll give this man $100,000 for his $8,000 property. And the city didn't know this. Now they know it. And Pete was laughing on the Zoom call. I said, and I didn't want to tell Pete that how much he was making or how much was being offered. I said, Pete, would you explain to the city how this works? And he said, yeah. He said, if he makes any profit on it, enough that we think it's worth our while, we get it. So theoretically, he'll get $100,000. EPA will get 92 grand of it to go back into the site, and he'll get his $8,000 back anyway. And that is my ramble on about that. Sorry. More questions? Yeah. Fun, huh? Okay.
Super helpful. Thank you for that. No,
You're
I appreciate it. I mean, like I said, I could keep asking you questions all day. We are about to run out of time.
Yeah.
So thanks. I hope we can do a follow-up interview with you
Sure.
in the future. This has been super helpful. I will hand it back to Mattison to wrap us up.
I just have one more question. I'm curious, you've mentioned the presence of hurricanes a few times, being a Gulf community. Is there any special precautions that Sanders Beach takes, and are these being considered in the remediation of the site and how it's being built? Because I know you had mentioned fears of flooding.
We were told, as it is right now, the detention pond is a 100-year pond. It's designed for a 100-year flood. Once all the entombing is in place, a lot of water can run off of it, and at least it's clean. It may flood something somewhere if the pond can't handle it, but at least it won't be leaching contaminant into the neighborhood. A storm is not going to damage the cap or the entombment or anything else, all that solid. So we're concerned about it, but at least we know that if it does cause flooding, which it shouldn't, it won't be gross water.
Well, thank you. Mm-hmm. And is there anything else wrapping up that you would like to add, or we didn't think to ask you would like to talk about?
No. I mean, like I said, I appreciate all being here, but once again, I could literally sit here and ramble on for hours. So I don't even know what else I could tell you. You're pretty much up to speed with things at the moment, but things are changing rapidly, and hopefully not for the bad, for the worst.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for your time.